All right, let's get into this. We got 75 people in here, and that's I'm really thankful for all you guys. And so, as many of you know, an incident happened in Pelican Bay, November 21st. So just before Thanksgiving, uh, the particular, of it are pretty cut and dry, right? There was a Norteño that worked in the kitchen, and he got separated from other Northerners, and and got blasted by Southsiders, right? And initially, I mean, it was pretty bad. There was some question about whether or not he would survive. I think now it seems to be that he's kind of made it out of the woods in terms of that stuff. So I think people would be surprised now if he didn't make it, which is good. I don't want to see anybody lose their life in there over any of this kind of stuff, right? At all. And so it's been interesting. What's up, CDAT? Joshua Nov, 211 Sacramento. So uh, it's been interesting, and I think what the company line is going to be is that uh, this Norteño had been under the influence. Either he was under the influence when this happened, or had been under the influence sometime recently before that. Then had gotten disrespectful, either towards those particular Southsiders or Southsiders in general, and these Southsiders took it upon themselves to blast him. And I think the inmate's going to turn around and say we didn't know anything about it, and these Southsiders are going to face serious repercussions from us, and the NF is going to say we didn't know anything about it, but sounds like the guy got out of line, and we got a bigger vision, right? And what's up, Nightmare 209? And so, and there's gonna be people, right, that are gonna watch this or hear this and say, well, I don't think that's true, right? How could these guys do it without the MN knowing, or how would the NF this? And those are all fair questions, but they're not questions that we're gonna really get the answer to, because that's not how it works in prison anymore. Um, again, I think the NF and the MA are coming together and deciding this is the narrative that we're going to put forward to everybody, right? To our people on both sides. And folks may believe it, they may not believe it. It doesn't matter because they ain't going to do nothing about it, right? And I don't mean that in a challenging way. I just mean that if they say that's what happened, then you have to move forward as if that's what happened. And I I don't think it had anything to do with the Norteño being black. That's just not really how it works, right? Skin color don't matter. He's a Norteño, and so I think that had anything to do with it. I don't think it had anything to do with him being structured. You know, honestly, that identity is pretty meaningless in California Department of Corrections now, right? The end soul, whatever new language of it is, right? What's up, Arisa? No. That identity isn't really meaningful there because you got NF on the yard, and they run the show when it comes to the North, and so and that's kind of something I wanted to talk about. I don't think that it was a declaration of war by these Southsiders because they don't have the capacity to declare war, right? They don't have the authority to do that. You know what I mean? It's the NF and the Mexican Mafia's world in there, and only they decide if there's going to be war or there's not going to be war or this or that, right? And I I think there's zero appetite amongst. I won't say zero, but I don't think there's much at all appetite amongst the NF or the Mexican Mafia to have an end to all hostilities, right? Uh, I see you, Johnny Mota. Salute. Jedi Mind Tricks. And so they I don't they don't want that because it's about money. And here's some of kind of the hard truth, right? I learned I really first started coming to terms with this with the whole Southsider Crip issue in Salinas Valley, right? That I made some videos about, and I think people misinterpreted where I was coming from, in terms of like I was taking sides or I was backing this group or that group or whatever, and that's not the case. I'm not a gang member, that's not what this is about. But where I went wrong, I think, and I've talked to some people that are currently incarcerated that are on active yards, right? And and where I went wrong is I I try to apply how prison was when I was in there to how it is now, and you just can't. It's apples and oranges, right? I don't know what it was like to walk the yard before the NF and the MA got slammed. There's not a whole lot of people currently in prison who did. And equally, I don't know what it's like to walk the yard with them now that they're not slammed. My time frame fit in between those two, and and so when I was in there, yes, we there was policies, there were bonds and teachings, and there was all sorts of stuff in place for Nortenos, and I know that there's some variation of that for Southsiders as well, right? Uh, where if you heard about an incident, you could say, well, this is the way it should be dealt with, or this is what would be expected, or this is proper, or this is not proper. None of that stuff matters anymore, though, right? And that's where I had to kind of, check myself, right? Is because the NF is out there now. So in terms of the Norteños, and it's the same with the Southerners, right? But in terms of the Northerners, um, all those teachings, all that stuff was in place so that we could govern ourselves, and this whole idea of a movement and that kind of stuff in the absence of the NF, right? But now that they're there, all that stuff is out the window. It doesn't really matter because you're going to listen to whoever the NF authority on that yard is, and that's just the way it goes. And it doesn't matter if it is consistent with what you learned before or teachings or this. None of that stuff matters. That stuff was a placeholder, right? And that placeholder is not needed anymore because the big metals are out there themselves, and they do what they want, right? So that's the difference, and you have a different caliber, and I don't mean caliber in terms of more or less tough or gangster or any. I'm not putting anybody down in this. I'm critical of prison gangs because I've always been critical of prison gangs since I've been on YouTube, um, and since before YouTube, because I don't think they're good for us. I don't think they're good for our communities. I don't think they're good for the prison system in California. I don't think they make doing time better for the average person. So no, I don't like that they exist. I don't think that they're healthy, but it is a fact of life as it stands, right? So um, it is what it is. They're there, but I'm not being critical here of Northerners or Southerners or even generational differences. Like, oh, back in my day we were like this, and now you guys are like that. None of that stuff matters. There's tough guys and weenies and poodle, everything in between, um, on any given day in any given prison system anyway, right? So so that's not even really relevant. Um, but it is different. And the folks doing time now, you just listen to what the person on yard tells you, and oftentimes that's the ultimate authority, right? And that was the difference before is we had authority, but we weren't technically the ultimate authority. But the ultimate authority was sitting on a shelf, worried about money. So as long as they got money, they didn't care. Now they're on the yard, worried about money, and as long as they get money, they don't care. I don't think that this Norteño that got blasted, um, I don't think he matters to the NF. I'm hopefully he has family and friends and stuff that he matters to, and I'm sure that there's some homeboys that done time with him that he matters to, but it doesn't matter to the NF organization, just like the Southsiders that blasted him. I don't think they matter to the Mexican Mafia organization. Again, I'm sure people care about them and whatnot, but they they don't matter, right? Money matters, and that's just the reality. And I'm I'm not gonna sit on here and suggest it, and I'll jump in the chat here in just a second. But I'm also not gonna sit here though and be like, oh, Northerners and Southerners should take off on the NF and the MA or whatever. That's not my place. You know, I'm not advocating violence. I feel for the Northerners and Southerners alike that are running around on these yards because it is tense. I know it's tense, um, and it's tension on both sides. You know, and prison's a dangerous place, and it's a predatory place, and stuff happens, and that's just the reality. You know, was this avoidable? Probably. Um, Again, will we ever get the real detailed what's the backstory type thing? Maybe someday. You know, somebody debriefs or locks it up or comes on YouTube or something and it's like, well, I was there. But it's it in the meantime, I don't know that it really matters in the day-to-day lives of the men that are doing time in there right now though. Right? Um it it's funny that this whole active identity gets celebrated so much. And I've maybe contributed to that in some ways. Not active, like I'm not an active gang member, I don't pretend to be, but uh you know, especially like rappers and entertainers stuff. I'm active and free to active, active this, active that. And I get it, but active in the streets means something a little different than in prison. And in prison, all active means is you conform without ruffling feathers to your slave owner, basically, right? Is really what it comes down to. The NF has always owned the Norteño identity, right? And the MS always owned the Southerner identity. You know, they created these terms, they created these labels. Neither one of them really care about geography. They never cared about geography. That's just them making the best of the situation in terms of CDC and splitting people up and just trying to figure out how to get their power and their control, right? But the stuff that gang members fight about doesn't really matter to them, and the individuals that are doing the fighting don't really matter to them, right? It's their own brothers barely matter to them. You know what I mean? So much less anybody else. Um, and it's just, it's a mess. It is what it is. But if you're in there on these active yards, and I'm not suggesting folks go unactive or not active. I'm not suggesting anybody do anything. Actually, what I will suggest is this: if you're in there on those active yards, when you come home, uh, maybe try to stay out of prison, right? And you know that it's rough in there. You know what I mean? You know that it's rough in there, and you know that you're owned by this organization, and you got to do what you got to do to survive the environment that you're in. So I'm not faulting anybody for it, and I'm not suggesting again that Northerners and Southerners now are somehow less tough or it's it sucks, man. The oppressive thumb of the NF and the oppressive thumb of the Mexican mafia, and they've always had oppressive thumbs, pretty much always, right? Maybe not since day one, but pretty soon after. Um, Folks got to live up under those thumbs now, and I'm sure that it's rough, and I'm sure it's confusing, and I'm sure it's frustrating, but I also think there's a lot of people who don't really know, like, any different. They've come to prison in the last 10, 12 years or whatever, and that's where I stepped out, maybe out of line when not out of line because I stand by what I said, but I misinterpreted the backlash in terms of like I said, when I got into the conversation around Northerners backing up the Amero who got blasted for disrespecting a black dude and this and that, and it's clear there's just a group of people with a little bit different mindset that's incarcerated now, um, and so they're making do how they make do, man, and I'm not in prison, thank God, and I really try to avoid making choices that could lead me back in prison. So I don't have to figure out how to exist in those environments. Um, but no, Jonathan Blaze, I'm not. I don't have to. Uh, I don't have to figure out how to exist, but they do, right? And so far be it for me, from the comfort of my home in the outskirts of Reno, to tell a dude that's doing time on a yard in the Bay or Salinas Valley or Calipat or anywhere else how to do their time, right? And how to navigate that space. But what I will suggest is when you come home, maybe don't add your voice to this narrative that like there's some noble identity in this whole active thing. And again, I'm not saying we should celebrate non-actors or dropouts, but folks out here in the streets that ain't never really done time, they don't know what they have in store for them in there. But you do. And you know it's about money. And you know that the odds of you really being on the inside is the same odds as a kid who plays high school football, making it to, be an all pro in the NFL. Right? It's so like I said, folks do what they gotta do to survive. I'm not suggesting some crazy revolt. I'm not suggesting anything. But just be honest with ourselves and the influence that we have in our own circles, in our own communities. There's not a lot of young people that watch YouTube, right? There's not a lot of teenagers watching this right now. There's a good handful of folks that are doing time on active yards that are going to see this video, right? But there's not a whole lot of their younger loved ones that are watching it, right? And that's fine, But we all have a circle of influence. We all have spheres, whether it's our nephews or whether it's just coworkers or whoever it is, right? And I ask, I would suggest if this is not the life that you want for them, don't be afraid to say that. And that doesn't mean that you gotta be a quote unquote weenie, right? And it gets hard because folks get all fickle online and said you say something, then it gets taken out of context. But let's just take this from the perspective of somebody in the general population on the main line. They haven't dropped out, they haven't locked it up, anything else. Like for those folks, right? It not wanting your loved ones to go through the same thing that you're going through doesn't mean that you have to be to that extreme, right? And I think that's where we got to normalize. Like, can we just do our time, come home, because most of you are coming home. Can we just do our time, come home, and live our life? I'll tell you, the people I talk to, that's what a lot of us have done. I talk to dudes that did their time, they never locked, and I'm not comparing, I'm not putting other people down. Don't get all fucking butthurt. I'm just speaking a fact though. Like, I talked to a lot of folks that did time in the same era that I did time in, and who didn't debrief and didn't lock it up. And some of them are from the north, and some are from the south, and some are blacks, and there's a white guy in there somewhere. So different people's politics are different, but there's a lot of those folks that I talk to. They're my friends in real life, right? And that's what we did, bro. We came home and decided I don't want to go to prison anymore. I want to try to avoid prison. And that doesn't mean they're all speaking at schools, although some do. It doesn't mean that they all went to college, although some, have. Everybody's different. But they found their lane. They're raising their families. They're being a productive member of society. And they don't celebrate the buffoonery. They don't do any of that stuff. They're just living as a normal adult who happens to have done some time in prison. And I feel like this social media era, we've gotten away from that being a possibility. It's like, if you was ever a gang member, you better stay a gang member. You better stay with the activities, and you better move. Like, bro, it doesn't make any sense. And if not, Oh, you must be some PC dropout, rationist, blah, blah, blah. Like, most people are not in either one of those categories, right? And I think it'd be cool if collectively we could get to a place of just normalizing. Look, bro, I did what I had to do when I was in prison, right? And I did my time, and I came home, and I try not to come back to prison. That's it. Like, it doesn't have to be so complicated. It doesn't have to be so many labels attached to it. And maybe I'm out of prison and I don't like people that did their time a certain way. And maybe I'm out of prison and I don't care. And maybe I'm out of prison and I don't even talk to anybody else that went to prison. Like, everybody got to make their own path. It's it it's not easy to do time. There's parts of it that are easy, right? But it's both very difficult and very pretty simple, you know. But you can't tell me you in there living your best life, and I wouldn't expect it. But let's stop celebrating. Like, it's I don't know, man. Hopefully this makes sense to somebody. I'm gonna go through the comments right here in a minute. Hopefully it makes sense to somebody. But in terms of this situation, I don't think it's the end of all hostilities, because the end of hostilities is about money, right? It's about these organizations and having money. They don't care, you know, and that's all. They they they're not going to sacrifice their profits for somebody's pride or ego. You know what I mean? It's not going to go that far unless maybe it's one of their brothers. But even that's rare these days. You know what I'm saying? It's uh, it's just that's just the reality, bro. None of us that important, you know. But we can be important out here. You're really important out here. Uh, and like I said, man, you do what you got to do to get out the joint. You know what I mean? According to whatever your value system is, right? And that's why I don't really sweat people anymore for it. I don't know, man. I sometimes I get a little wild here in terms of being judgmental and that kind of stuff. Sure, it happens. I'm not perfect, you know, and sometimes that stuff happens. But in the real grand scheme of things, what matters is how you are out here. You know, at least that should matter more than how you are in there, because the only people impressed with how you are in there is people in there, and how far is that gonna get you? You know what I'm saying? You you get up getting blasted in the kitchen, and oh well, you could end up blasting somebody in the kitchen and lose your career. Like, it don't work. But I don't think it was a declaration of war. I don't think it's gonna kick off more. There's been little skirmishes. I think there's probably gonna continue to be little skirmishes here and there. Um, and that's just how it is. But you know, newsflash: this is not the first incident between North and South since the end of hostilities. Since these dudes got out the shoe, it's probably the most violent. I think it's the most violent. I'm not 100% sure. It's definitely the most talked about by a landslide. It's the most talked about incident between North and South since the end of hostilities. But it's not the first. You know, it's prison, it's egos, it's testosterone. So you got a lot more drug use on the yard than you did even back then, and so stuff's gonna happen. But again, trying to take the perspective of doing time in the '90s and apply it to doing time in 2023, it's not gonna make sense. That's what I've learned, at least for myself. It's just not gonna make sense, and I don't need it to make sense, and I can't make it make perfect sense for you guys. Like, just because I've been in prison, just out of homeboy, and just it. I can't make it make sense because it's a different world, and I can't relate to it in those ways, you know. But let me.